Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Building a Holistic Business Case for Procurement Technology. I would now like to introduce Konstantin Limbarakis, Director of Product Marketing at Selectica. Konstantin?
Hi, everybody. Good morning and maybe good afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world today. We are so delighted to have you to join us for this webinar. We are expecting a great audience and wanted to make sure that we have a great opportunity to present to you this concept around holistic procurement deployments and in managing your procurement environment in a holistic way. Before I do that, though, I'd like to do some quick intros on our keynote speakers. Some of you may know our speakers already from previous webinars and from previous experiences, but I'd like to do a quick shout out here to our speakers. The first presenter is Duncan Jones, a recognized analyst from Forrester. Duncan, why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Konstantin. Yeah, so I'm a vice president and principal analyst at Forrester Research. I've been studying the space of e-procurement, e-sourcing, and related applications for about 8 years now, and hopefully I've got some good insights to share with you about how to justify investment in them.
Thank you, Duncan, so much. The next gentleman I'd like to introduce is Pierre Marie-Raoult. He is a recent colleague of mine now with BPAC, a gentleman who I've worked with in the past. And Pierre, tell me a little bit about your background and what we're expecting to get out of the webinar today.
Good morning, everyone. So I am Pierre. I'm Director of Business Development for BPAC. So I've been working at BPAC for 5 years, focused solely on the purchase to pay, which is now the downstream side of the Selectica offer. I've been in the supply chain world for the last 15 years, working in different diverse industries, specifically focused on retail. So today we will review, obviously, both values of the procurement solutions, and both on upstream and downstream, and obviously I will try to bring as many examples and live examples as possible on the downstream.
Excellent, Pierre, and thank you. And then finally, my name again is Konstantin Limbarakis, Director of Product Marketing. I've been in this space for quite some time, as well as looking at this from an analyst lens, as well now as a product-focused professional. So, coming from our respective positions, we definitely want to give you this overview of an insight and seeing what's trending and give you our respective points of view. Before we do that, just kind of want to give you a quick intro again of what we do here at Selectica and what we're all about. You may recognize our names from the standpoint of Selectica having been brought as part of IASTA about a year ago, and now recently announced an acquisition of BPAC. And as an organization, what this really means for us now is becoming a recognized provider in the entire area of source to pay with contract management. We are a globally focused organization across the board, from our headquarters in San Francisco to aspects of our offices in Indianapolis and also in London, and now adding to that areas such as Paris and Hamburg. So again, our overall focus being here is being a client satisfaction-focused organization, bringing together best-of-breed solutions that's really trying to drive innovation. And this innovation is really, again, as part of this big question of how do you manage procurement technology overall, and what are the different ways of doing that. And as we go through that, I'd like to just do a quick intro here, too. Again, being a latest member of our team here from the BPAC perspective quickly, if you could just maybe do a quick introduction, Pierre, from the BPAC perspective and what you guys are offering and bringing to the table from a procurement standpoint.
Sure, thank you, Konstantin. So BPAC has always been focused on the purchase to pay. That's really what we do. Started in 2000, the company in Europe. The company has been growing across the different aspects of the P2P, starting from the procurement and really growing around the finance on the budget side, finance on the accrual side. As you can see on the slide, we have a very large offering on the P2P, and we have been recognized by Gartner as one of the visionaries in the Magic Quadrant this year, in their first Magic Quadrant. And I think one of the main reasons why we have such a success is because We really provide a very secure cloud platform, but also we authorize our clients to have a lot of flexibility. We really believe the P2P should be addressing the business processes of each organization, and not really trying to provide them a template that they need to reproduce. Another thing is that we are very innovative in the way we approach the technology to focus on the client's value. So typically, I mean, we're hosted on a very solid platform on Amazon Web Services, and we are able to deploy anywhere in the world in a couple of minutes. So again, we are very happy to join the Selectica family. We see the complementarity, we see the synergies. It's very obvious, and hopefully we will be able to vehicle that today during the webinar.
Thank you, Pierre, so much for that. And I think before we complete on and move into the actual formal section of the webinar, again, understanding what this means to the table from the standpoint of bringing together strategic sourcing, procure to pay within the wider contract life cycle, it really addresses this idea of being holistic and how are you trying to manage procurement in its entirety? How are you trying to manage all the different challenges that are coming up with regard to the technologies as well as the stakeholders and the ability to manage the needs of the wider organization and the enterprise. So as we do that, what I like to now do then is try to bring that into the table and show how, from an analyst perspective, again, in dialogue that we've had with Forrester in the past, how do we do that and how do we manage that with the vision, insight, and control that we're bringing to the table with our technology. So without further ado, I'd like to, again, bring Duncan to the picture here and give us your perspective, Duncan. Looking forward to hearing from you here.
Thank you, Constantine, and thanks for inviting me to talk about this topic, which I think is very interesting and very topical. You know, Forrester is in the technology research business. We're trying to help you challenge the existing thinking and find new ways to use technology to help your business grow. And certainly that can sometimes be difficult for the procurement side of an organization, because although cost saving is very important, it's maybe not as interesting as increasing market share or customer experience. But I think there's a real case for how procurement technology can go beyond just cost savings. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this holistic business case. And as a kind of analogy or a theme running through this, we all have been reading recently about the problems in the automotive companies are having with the airbags in their cars allegedly failing. Now, this is a great example of where deficiencies in the supply chain can really damage a company's brand. People are holding the auto companies to account, whereas it wasn't them who made the faulty airbag, but then we still blame them. It's still a bad experience of driving that particular car. And in a way, good sourcing and procurement technology could have prevented that happening if there'd been better monitoring of the quality of suppliers, better evaluation of them. Maybe we could have prevented the problem in the first place. But it's really an analogy also to say that technology is kind of like our airbag as procurement professionals. Something happens in our organization, some maybe natural disaster somewhere in the world, or some failure by a supplier or somebody doing something that they shouldn't do somewhere in our organization. Hopefully the technology appears, leaps into action, and stops us going through the windscreen. So I want you to think of that when we're talking about supplier management. It's really like something that protects you from going through the windscreen when there's a supplier-driven problem. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about what I mean, why supplier management is so important these days. then talk a bit about the application strategies for what Forrester calls e-purchasing, and what that means then in terms of building the business case for investing in some solutions, and lastly finishing with just some summary recommendations. Now we're going to hopefully leave plenty of time for questions, so do send your questions in through the chat panel, and we'll try and answer them at the end. So, when I speak with our clients, whether they're procurement professionals or finance or IT professionals, I see this conflict of interests. We've done some surveys about priorities over the years, and we get this consistent picture that you, as procurement professionals, are kind of torn as to what to do with your supplier pool. On the one hand, you want to expand your supplier pool. You want to get new sources of innovation, new ideas, new blood coming into the business. And you also want to increase competition. We know that having more bidders in an event gives you more savings. We don't want our existing suppliers to become complacent. But on the other hand, if we expand our supplier base, then we run into all sorts of problems because we have to manage them. We don't have the resources to manage them effectively. We can't perhaps validate their compliance with our corporate social responsibility policies. Maybe we can't vet them for financial probity. So there's this other driver that says, right, we've got to rationalize our supplier base. We've got to have fewer suppliers, economies of scale, savings from aggregating, only deal with a few big suppliers that we can really monitor closely, and then our problems will be solved. And so the question is, well, which direction should we go in? And of course the answer is, well, you have to do both. You have to be continually consolidating and rationalizing and aggregating in order to make space to bring in new suppliers as new sources of innovation and competition. And the technology can certainly help you do that. But there is this risk side. There's so much emphasis on brand value, on image, on customer experience, and actually there's lots of examples in the public domain about where supply chain failures or suppliers' problems cause damage to a brand. Here's one where Airbus is in trouble with its airline customers because it's late in delivering its aircraft, and Airbus is blaming its suppliers and saying, well, it's not our fault. Another example is the airbags. There's great statistics here about the vehicles recalled, the injuries or even deaths caused by this supplier problem. And a slightly different one, and this is an example from an Australian newspaper where they photographed these children in India making these rugby balls for this company Summit. Now that does damage to the brand being associated with child labor. Now, it wasn't Summit that employed the children. It probably wasn't Summit's supplier or even Summit's supplier's supplier. It was maybe 2 or 3 layers down in the supply chain, but nonetheless, it's Summit's name on the rugby ball in the photo. It's Summit's name in the headlines. And so that's really where supplier risk is of such concern to organizations, because their name can get in negative headlines even though they themselves haven't done anything directly wrong. Now, we have looked at supplier risk management, and we also talk about performance management, and we've noticed that depending on which vertical industry the client is in, they're focusing primarily on one type of risk. So automotive, for example, has been focusing so much on supply chain resilience, on just-in-time delivery, and what happens if there's a supplier failure, does the production line stop? Seems like maybe they've taken the eye off the ball in terms of quality and safety. In other areas, financial services, they're focused much more on financial probity, regulatory compliance, food safety. And in life sciences, they're worried about regulation. And I would really urge you to look beyond the most obvious type of risk and actually recognize this as more of a holistic assessment. You have to look at supply chain resilience, of course, but it's also CSR implications, it's regulation, it's actually all of these together. Now, one of the things that's driving supplier management as a practice is a realization that we're dependent on suppliers for much more of the innovation in our product. And here's an example from a car. I've just recently bought a new car, and some of the best features in it are things that maybe I wouldn't have actually specified. Things that I wouldn't have thought of. But I really like them now I've got the car. Now, I'm sure that none of them actually came from the car manufacturer themselves. I'm sure that they came from the company that makes the seating, the company that makes the lighting, the company that makes the intelligent control system. And in the automotive industry, they recognize that they're competing with each other to get the best suppliers, working with them, and sharing their best ideas with them. They talk about formal programs about being their supplier's customer of choice. In many other industries to do with luxury goods, that's a common phrase, customer of choice. And I think this is spreading. So always, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, sourcing technology was all about cost savings and getting more out of suppliers for less money. Now kind of the boot's on the other foot. They can kind of pick and choose if they're really innovative. And so we want to do supplier management because we want to be the customer of choice. We want to be getting the best innovation. This is an analysis that we use to help clients with assessing their supplier base and working out how to segment them. You can't manage everybody to the same level of intensity, and by doing a sort of formal categorization, you can maybe work out which of the really important companies in this top right who you want to be your sources of innovation, bringing you ideas that make your product better, and which are the ones on the to the left of the quadrant, maybe the ones bottom left, where you're really not going to spend much time with them. You're just going to do some basic monitoring for high risks that you need to act on. And of course, with this supplier management problem, with the supplier base getting bigger, or at least not getting any smaller, you've got to automate this stuff down at the bottom left and the top left. You can no longer do effective monitoring of risk and risk management by throwing people at a bunch of emails and spreadsheets. We need technology to help us automate it. So that's really why supplier management is so important. We've got to really streamline and automate the basic vendor monitoring so that the human beings can free up their time to focus on the relationship management of those really strategic suppliers who are making our business better. I'd urge you to actually think about supplier loyalty as a goal, and technology can help you track your efforts. Are you getting suppliers bidding on events and you never win them, you never award them any business? You'll soon lose them. Maybe there are some outreach that you can do. We've spoken to clients that are really much more formally bringing suppliers into the organization, inviting them in for training on just basic management skills and people skills, or just on the direction of their industry, treating them like customers when it comes to network events like offsites and sporting events. Really formally creating a culture and monitoring the culture to say, are we treating suppliers well so that they're happy to be a supplier, or even proud to be a supplier of organization? And then along with that, automate the detailed monitoring so that we can create time and space for those above activities. So, okay, so I'm making a case for technology to do that, to really improve the supplier management. How do we actually go about picking e-purchasing applications? So I apologize to Mr. Carey here that the formatting has squished his picture a little bit, but now here's my image of him as a CPO. For years I've been talking with procurement leaders who've been saying, well, if only I could get this global visibility of my supply base, I'd be able to be, the world's most effective chief procurement officer. And for years they've been struggling with this, unreliable spend data. It's incorrectly classified in the transactional systems. It's in multiple different instances, and the consultants told us if we implemented a common ERP system everywhere, we'd get this omniscience, and we really didn't. Then they told us to put in a business data warehouse, and that hasn't worked either. And now they're trying to convince us to put it all on in-memory technology. It's just another type of solution. Somehow, whatever we do, we've got to get this omniscience to find out who is buying what from whom, because otherwise we can't honor these obligations that we have for managing the supplier risk that I talked about earlier on. Now, one way to get this visibility, as opposed to these sort of technical solutions like data warehouses, is to actually layer on top of the transactional systems a holistic e-purchasing platform that does everything. And when we talk about e-purchasing, Forrester kind of divides it up into the strategic skill-based application, sometimes called upstream or source to contract, top right here, and then down in the bottom left, the transactional, procure to pay, or downstream applications. And you really need both of these. You need to be getting this global visibility of spend analysis. You need to have the contracts and the sourcing events. But you won't get the control and the visibility if people are then ignoring those chosen suppliers and buying from whoever they want to. So you need good procure-to-pay technology to close the loop, if you like. And in the middle, we've drawn supplier risk and performance management, which is these new capabilities that automate the monitoring of the vendors, the single source of truth for who are the suppliers that we're buying from, but also aggregating the transactional performance data. So this is our evaluation of the market. It's quite a large market, a few $1 billion of revenue across all the vendors. And I think it's very interesting to look at this chart and see it's a very fragmented market in terms of the number of vendors in it. Even if we look at the vendors 21 to 40, we're still only getting to just over 80% of the total market. There's another tranche of vendors, specialists in one niche area or one vertical, a lot of them having very good products. So that's a real challenge for you. You're trying to put together this complete solution that I drew on the previous picture, and you've got a huge choice of vendors that you might work with. None of them really giving you everything in that wheel. Now, our recommendation at Forrester is therefore to adopt what we call a hybrid application strategy. We don't think it's right for many organizations to expand the core ERP's footprint to cover all the related business processes, like all these buy-side processes that I've shown on the right-hand side, or all the things like sell-side processes on the left-hand side. Yeah, certainly there are a few organizations that can do that, but for most of us, we need a more holistic, more hybrid strategy where we complement the core with some specialist applications around the outside. Now, one of the decisions that you can make is to say, actually, I'm going to pick my battles. I've got a fragmented organization, lots of autonomous division and business leaders. I've got to decide where am I going to layer on top a standard solution that we use everywhere, and where am I going to allow them to pick their own. And so in this picture I'm giving as an example, maybe we'll put in a single supplier risk and performance management platform, maybe a single source to contract platform, and then let the business units make their own decision about procure to pay, just pick whatever they want. Or maybe vice versa. It's up to you where you go on this. I'm just saying you don't have to implement one solution everywhere right off the bat. Let's start with somewhere where we can get the proverbial low-hanging fruit, put something enterprise-wide where there's least resistance from the autonomous business units and most business value coming back to us. And then gradually we can standardize in the other areas as well. So that's the purchasing application strategy. That's how we start on the journey to the full platform. How do we actually get that justified? That can be a real challenge. A lot of our clients are struggling with that because the budgets are tight. If there is available IT budget, it's often being diverted to building customer-facing websites and marketing automation technologies and that sort of thing that drives business impact on the top line. And there's maybe less scope for us to justify things that do savings on the bottom line. Now, Forrester has a formal methodology for looking at business cases. We help clients understand the different aspects of what we call total economic impact that they need to take into account. So I think a starting point for this e-purchasing technology is we have to make sure that we look at not just the costs of the project and the benefits in terms of cost savings. We also have to look at benefits that we will get from reducing our risk, and also the flexibility to add to that solution later on. Risk management, it's very difficult to value. You don't really see the value of risk management, even in a supplier context, until you don't spend on supplier risk management and you end up in the papers for some product failure or the children making your rugby ball. So you have to kind of point at the disasters of others to try and justify the investment. I'd really encourage you when you're putting together this business case to don't talk in terms of supplier margins, because that certainly you can reduce supplier margins with more competition, but that in the wrong place can jeopardize your status as customer of choice. It can hamper your attempts to get innovation from the supply chain, and that sort of thing can be the enemy of quality. So let's look at ways we can save money without necessarily reducing supplier margins. So, of course, aggregating spend with fewer suppliers. Maybe we've done as much of that as we possibly can. Now we have to move to greater efficiency. Maybe we can work more closely with the supplier, look at its cost base, and see how we can help the supplier reduce its cost base by the way we design our product or the way we buy it from them. There's a lot of savings that companies report about eliminating invoicing errors when they put in a proper procure-to-pay solution. Of course, that's difficult to put in the business case up front because you don't know how much money you're wasting paying invoices that are wrongly priced or paying duplicate invoices. But unless you have great technology, that is almost certainly going on. So there is a saving to be made just by eliminating errors. So maybe put in some pilot project, maybe a one-off evaluation of invoices in a particular category. You can unearth some evidence that there are invoicing errors slipping through, and try and extrapolate from that to say, well, if this problem is repeated everywhere, we could be maybe overpaying by millions of dollars. There's a lot of opportunity to reduce waste. Companies who've put in some good e-purchasing technology find out that there's a lot of sort of inefficient buying, people buying stuff that they don't really need, or buying the wrong product, over-specifying. There's lots of opportunities to reduce efficiency, to increase efficiency and reduce waste. All it takes is to get the visibility, and the actions are obvious. And then the last point is, generally people in the business are trying to do the right thing, but they're not necessarily rewarded when they do it. So greater visibility will allow us to reward people for when they are, diligent and sensible when they're spending the company's money, and knowing that they're being, monitored in detail will be a powerful motivator for people to be diligent. So what about on the risk mitigation side? Cost savings are nice, but I'm getting so many questions about supplier risk as a priority. And it's coming often from a different angle. It's being driven to the chief procurement officer, but it's the chief finance officer, the head of compliance, the head of marketing, who are telling the CPO, "Hey, you've got to get this sorted." And so a great way to justify investment is playing this risk mitigation card, because savings, well, they're nice, but we can put off spending money that generates savings, and maybe we think we've saved all the money that we can. But risk mitigation isn't optional. The damage to our brand is so immense. The compliance is not optional, and the fines if we make a mistake are huge. So let's find who is the executive, the C-level guy who really is owning the risk management problem, and let's convince them that he needs to help us implement some technology to close off some sources of risk. Let's use these examples of airbags and rugby balls and things like that to highlight the damage to us if we don't put in place mitigation. Don't wait for your car to hit the wall before you implement the airbag. So I have to be realistic. It's not easy to get IT funding, but particularly when there's so many other potential uses for that investment. So some ways to kind of reduce that conflict with other projects that might be working on the customer-facing side is, the first one is to make sure that the commercial model allows us to generate savings in the early phases of the project. So we're not asking the CFO to write a huge check that he won't get back for 3 to 5 years. A configurable SaaS platform is going to reduce our needs for IT resource. We won't be as beholden to IT to get our product up and running, to configure it, to support it. Maybe we'll need some help integrating with other systems, but if we're smart, we'll minimize those integration points. An example of what I mean by that is, maybe we want to have a procure-to-pay product, and we, of course, need to get the financial transactions into our ERP system. We can do that by integrating at the point at which an invoice is approved for payment. That's a single integration point. Companies that I've spoken to who try to integrate at other points as well, when the order's created, when the order's received, when the invoice is received, the integration has got so complicated they weren't sure where to make changes, what the flow was, and it quickly gets out of hand. So don't be too ambitious in how you integrate your e-purchasing systems with the back-end systems of record. And then the last point is, you're going to need expertise. This isn't just about picking some software and implementing it. You're going to need to make radical changes to the way your sourcing and procurement works. You need people who understand what those changes are going to look like and can actually train you as they help you implement the software. And that will also reduce the call for the resources of functions like IT. There's a couple of examples of clients that have done that. And one is a global paint manufacturer, a very large organization that had grown by acquisition. So they had almost no spend visibility because the data was spread across multiple different ERP systems. And maybe they had some program to rationalize the ERP landscape, but certainly the CPO couldn't wait years and years for that to happen. He needed to drive economies of scale now. Paint making is a very thin margin business. Now his approach was to start off with spend analysis, technology that would aggregate the transactional data from the ERP systems and give him some insight on who was buying what from whom. But that certainly wasn't the end of his ambition. The point was, by demonstrating some return on investment in this one area, he could then say, right, now let's expand the spend analysis product to the other modules like sourcing and contracts. So that was one approach to funding the rollout of a global e-purchasing platform. Next example is a company that's in the food industry, and their concern was not so much about savings, but about food safety and corporate social responsibility, and particularly fair trade in their business. Look, customer demands are increasing, but because all the business processes were totally decentralized, every business unit had a different approach to validating new prospective suppliers. The controls were very weak, or at least unreliable. So this organization's starting point was an e-sourcing suite that they could use particularly for what they called information management and performance management. They were getting some spend data, some procurement analytics like on-time delivery and so on, but the main focus was just on working out, who are we dealing with, and let's formalize the process for onboarding them. Now, the whole issue of food safety and compliance and diversity, that was not optional to the business unit. So if they tried to sell this on cost savings ground, the business units would have said, not your job, we're in charge, we'll do what we want. But by playing this CSR angle, the business units couldn't overrule the board. The board was right behind it. This is something we have to do. And that was how they managed to start their program. I think that's a really good example of how to use other initiatives in the business to win the executive backing for our project, which we all know is so vital to its success. So just to end with some summary recommendations, we need to align our supplier management efforts and an approach with the suppliers category. We need to be doing very automated basic monitoring of our smaller, riskier vendors. We need to do more relationship management and innovation management with our best, most strategic suppliers. And then to do that, let's put together an e-purchasing platform by combining a few broad suites with some niche specialists. So in my wheel, I drew 6 or 7 different application areas, and then I talked about how the market is fragmented, among so many different vendors. At Forrester, we don't recommend that you pick 8 or 10 vendors, one in each space, and try and assemble them all together into a complete suite. But we also recognize that it may be difficult to find one vendor that does everything to the level of quality and vertical specialization that you need. So usually what's required is an e-purchasing platform, maybe one for upstream, one for downstream, even better, one that does upstream and downstream, and then complement that with maybe some niche specialists in areas where the platform is less strong, or where there's something very specific that you need that's available from one of these smaller vendors. That's really, I think, the key to getting this complete solution. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope that was interesting and challenging, and certainly if you'd like to find out more about our view of the space and how to move forward, then feel free to contact me at this address. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Konstantin.
Thank you so much, Duncan, for that presentation. I appreciate your thoughts here and your wisdom. What we're going to do now is take this to the next level and say, how do we combine this over the next 15 minutes in understanding a technology approach to this holistic question with a lot of the questions that Duncan presented us with. And one of the things that we'll see here is just from an organizational standpoint, tying in the aspects of sustainability and risk management really has become the obligation now of what you're trying to do within a procurement platform. Trying to tie that with profitability and understanding how do you make procurement an advantageous and a competitive advantage, as well as trying to manage some of the operational efficiencies. And I think more specific to the technology challenge, a lot of times we're dealing with constant change in the organization. So all these things being said, in a perfect environment, it would be great if there wasn't change, but of course we all know that there is. And so when we're dealing with that, we see that there's often organizational changes that prohibit us and prevent the technology from actually reaching its peak. Things like M&A, divestiture, joint ventures, IPO, privatization. These are all things that we've seen from a technology provider standpoint that have prohibited things from happening. But we also can see that there are several times procurement changes that happen. As a result of a change in the company, we see that there's a company reorg, a structural change, a change in management where maybe a CPO that came from a different company or may have a certain technology perspective may want to impose or try to drive those initiatives as a part of what they're trying to do while other technology initiatives had already been started. So kind of backtracking in a way. And then also we know that, from a lot of the discussions that are out there, that resources have often been a major challenge. How do you get some of the knowledge and some of the components into the framework that may have not been traditional procurement or sourcing type skill sets that you've looked at in trying to get to your procurement objective. So these are some of the things that we've seen as an organization and understand that. And this is what then ends up happening. So this is kind of a summary of it. You may have started a separate P2P or sourcing platform implementation. You're still dealing with the wider ERP integration question. And then maybe even you're looking for answers to managing even, say, contract management from a procurement perspective and looking to get that to more of an enterprise-wide view. And also now finding ways to manage aspects of supplier management based on many of the points that Duncan brought up. And so the question then becomes, how do you do that, but knowing that there are some modern constraints? So you need to start and continue, but you can't fund everything up front. There's resources that you need, but how do you get that to the wider strategy? How do you achieve saving goals for getting that next level? And then how do you demonstrate the value, particularly, and this is what we've seen from our perspective, particularly to finance and IT.
So, Konstantin, this is Pierre. I have a quick question for you. You mentioned a couple of constraints, but one of the key constraints is to achieve savings, actually, before being able to move to the next level. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg, as it might require to invest before finding the savings. So what do you recommend there?
Well, we recommend there that, you try to get a staged approach when you're deploying the technology, and you really try to take a global approach to looking at that. And that really leads us to this next framework here. If you try to understand the wider picture of an enterprise, we know that all organizations have both a buying perspective and a selling perspective. So often when we talk to our prospects or people that try to understand what our technology does, we present to them this slide of knowing that you have a source-to-pay process and a quote-to-cash process. And as part of this, what we understand is that you need to try to find where you're trying to solve these problems with supplier management, with supplier risk, as a part of the bigger picture. And if we drill down into the actual more specific view, we know that one of the major failure points often of trying to deploy a holistic approach to expanding solutions is in the areas of the upstream and the downstream that we often call the strategic sourcing process to that P2P process. And we notice that one thing that you have to be aware of when you're deploying the technology is knowing that the strategic sourcing processes, as we see here, versus the P2P processes often have very different functions and in different points of view or different purposes of being. So for instance, when we look at this, we can see that strategic sourcing processes are often encompassing a much smaller user base than the potential of thousands of users you're dealing with on a P2P. The focus decisions might be much more strategic and analytic focused of knowing how to consolidate and master suppliers versus, the focus on execution, which is going to be much more transactional and policy enforcement driven. But then knowing that at the bottom there, we can see that supplier management is going to need to span that entire source-to-pay process. So how you manage your suppliers needs to be involved in the entirety of source-to-pay. We also see that contract management also needs to extend into source-to-pay, but also may need to extend out of that wider process. So how do you do that, and how do you manage that as a part of it? So one of the things that we've seen is that you need to then understand the core goals of the procurement technology depending upon where you're sitting. We can see here that strategic sourcing, the perspective is much more focused on savings opportunity, the output of productivity of knowing what you can get from a sourcing platform, to addressing and optimizing the actual sourcing process. Contract management is all about the relevant contracts, managing against the supplier requirements, knowing how you're managing against those obligations, and then understanding the unique contract risks such as compliance and risk that comes up with managing those suppliers. The P2P perspective is all about extreme user adoption. It's got to be intuitive. There doesn't need to be a lot of training to make sure you're optimizing the P2P flow for that company to get some real clarity of the purchase to pay, but then also be able to have instant visibility at any point in the process to know where a purchase order is, to know where an invoice is, to know if a payment has been made, to know if there's a problem in the process. And then finally, tying that all together, understanding how do we access all the relevant data points on supplier information. Do we have all the relevant points of information on that supplier? Do we know what we're able to do to manage against company needs? So are we onboarding that supplier on time? Are we tracking the proper diversity and the content information that we need? Or even the ability to audit the process and know if we go back and we see what supplier risks are involved with that supplier for managing that relationship. So in the big picture, we can see that the ultimate goal here of procurement is to achieve then control, visibility, and savings. And we can see here that there are various different ways of looking at control. Optimization, speed of execution. Increasingly, we're seeing this from our clients and saying we need to improve our ability to manage the process, to reduce the errors, and improve the regulatory aspects of that. From a visibility standpoint, we can see that it's about understanding trends. How easy is it to understand what's happening? Can we track to our budgets? Can we get insight into inventory? Can we improve the forecasting and also improve our financial visibility from a procurement perspective? And then finally, from the savings, which is, again, the more traditional aspect, being able to reduce the leakage, but also increasingly knowing how to avoid the costs that we might have seen and being able to track that as a part of a bigger savings picture, getting our contract compliance, aggregating spend, and being able to leverage things like discounts that may not have been visible in the past, and then overall just gaining operational efficiencies as a part of the bigger picture. So when we do that, again, this is coming often from a procurement perspective. What can we do to then improve how we work with our stakeholders to make sure that we're getting the right point of contact? And so when we're often looking at this, traditionally we've seen that procurement has dealt with some certain challenges, right? We see that in getting this holistic view, how do they get the approach to technology? One thing is from legal. Legal has become the traditional maybe stopping point where finding the right ground and getting legal requirements into the system and ensuring procurement is enabled to turn contracts around quickly and easily. From the IT perspective, we've seen that the often response is, where do we need a technology if we already have something that's been built in-house? The traditional argument with ERP. So being able to have procurement communicate effectively with IT and finding the right balance where maybe an ERP or an incumbent system might work, but knowing where procurement might be able to promote and get a better system in place that will get to its areas that it needs from a visibility standpoint. We've seen this particularly in areas like analytics and increasingly in the area of supplier management. And then finally, the finance challenge. This is the assuring the voice of procurements being heard by partnering with finance and tying P&L to savings and making sure that we're validating and being able to help finance validate and audit performance against results, helping them improve policies to related spend and setting agreed procurement targets for savings and efficiency, again, the traditional areas. But increasingly we're seeing that the ability to manage against supply chain where a question of direct and indirect spend might come up, how are you organized? Procurement might be reporting the supply chain and the cross-related areas of technology, particularly in supply-based management and supply risk management, might become the question here. And then the area of risk and compliance, as we said again, an increasing crossover into what compliance requirements are needed from procurement, from supplier and related contracts, to generally how source to pay is running operationally from an auditability and from a monitoring standpoint. So putting all this together in the next 6 to 7 minutes that we have left, how do you make sure that we have the straight path of being holistic in a procurement approach? And our view from both Selectica IASTA and from the BPAC point of view is that we feel that you need to be able to create short and long-term vision, establish an ongoing buy-in from stakeholders from the various different points of view that we just discussed, and then be able to show quick wins along the way. And over the next couple slides here, we'll show you examples of actual vision areas that we've used in walking through with our prospects and clients to understand what are the types of vision and visibility you need to create. This here, for instance, is an example of building that vision of saying we're looking at it from a strategic sourcing maturity standpoint and going from a sourcing-only platform that we may have had to being able to build a value optimization to a platform that provides a supplier-centric view of both a value optimization to control and compliance and the ability to actually manage and risk and collaborate with wider stakeholders. Another example of that is from an ECLM standpoint. Oftentimes when we're looking at contract management, we're looking at this from a very niche standpoint, from a repository, and what we're seeing today is increasingly organizations are using procurement contract management as a foothold to helping them manage the wider enterprise contract needs, but knowing procurement because of 80% of suppliers being an impact on an organization, looking at procurement as a way to lead that to the vision. And then we have procure to pay from a maturity standpoint. And maybe, Pierre, maybe you can give your point of view here from the BPAC standpoint on the value side of it.
Sure. I mean, on the procure to pay, and very quickly, I mean, what we see is the evolution of the maturity of the organization close to the procure to pay. And there are multiple stages. There is a stage approach you can have there. First of all, I mean, making sure that you can automate your transaction. Let's assume that the processes are already in place. I mean, that's obviously the first step. I mean, then we're going to ensure that most of the transactions are going from paper to electronics. So from POs and invoice, I mean, trying to reduce the paper pile. And then the second step would be the process automation. So now, I mean, instead of creating, for example, an electronic PO, let's the system do it. Okay, let's try to put some rules together and getting the system make decisions at that stage, like a three-way matching, for example, making sure we have the right rules in the system so the system can three-way match the invoice and send that into the workflow of approval. And then the third step is really the process optimization. So we're still focusing on the organization itself at that stage, But we're looking at in a much deeper approach where we are now able to measure the performance of the process, and we're going to look at where this process can be improved. So this is obviously where we start talking about improving the vendor onboarding. This is where we optimize the approval path. So right now everybody works from a standard approval metrics. Is that the most optimized approval metrics really? I mean, without compromising the compliance, most organizations can surely improve their metrics. And then also obviously the famous topic of invoice automation. How do you capture the invoice electronically so nobody has to do it? And then the fourth stage is really like the collaboration and anticipation. So now we are not considering the process only internally within the organization, but we're extending the scope of the process optimization to the different third parties. So obviously the vendor is the first one that comes to mind. But then why not looking at two other partners and potentially clients? And this is where we are going to have a proactive vendor management, making sure that we can work with the vendors proactively, and all the certifications and all the information that are required for the vendors are up to date in advance. And so this is a little bit the first step that we see as being the level of maturity of the P2P.
Thank you, Pierre, for that perspective. So in the big picture, then, how do you target again and create a holistic procurement technology journey? How deep do you want to go? How will you measure the success in getting to that holistic view? And often, one way to look at this is just kind of on a target range, if you will, and trying to measure that. So if we look, mapping out in this simple example that we presented here, knowing what level of planned deployment do you have and what level of expected insight are you expecting to get out of the system. And the example shows here that you may have been progressed along a certain path further, say, in spend analysis, so you may have a higher expected insight. But in other cases, for instance, with procurement, with contract management, for instance, you may be in a very early stage, and your goal out of the system is to get beyond, say, a repository to being able to use workflow. So it's really critical to weigh up expected benefits with results, really understand the estimates that you have prior to deployment experience, based on prior deployment experiences, but then also work with analysts like Forrester or consulting firms for recommendation, and ultimately seek the advice of your primary technology provider for understanding what should we be able to get out of the system, what should be the expected approach, how do we then get the system to work holistically and in the wider picture. This final picture here, again, is just a way of then creating the path of knowing that over time in the iterations, we know that technology doesn't work as simply as a step-by-step, but knowing through the level of complexity with every iteration that we have a step-by-step process that we want to look at. And the big picture here is that it's not always the linear process that we have designed here, but we know that it's a cumulative process and an iterative one. And what we mean by that is that you may have started with spend analysis to strategic sourcing to contract management, and over time, at some point, you may have redeployed because you're now looking to combine those solutions onto one platform. You then may have gone to contract management, to then an automation and an AP. And then now, and one of the things that we're increasingly seeing here is that supplier management and compliance and optimization are becoming a bigger part of that picture. So again, understanding the path and sequencing of technology and what you're looking to get out of it is a critical aspect to establishing this holistic view. For the sake of time, again, we've reached the top of the hour. We have some key core examples of case studies here that really show that these different types of companies have gone through different steps and procedures based on their story and getting to that holistic approach. In one case, we have an aluminum manufacturer that looked at it from a spend visibility standpoint and achieved their goal because they were a decentralized process and went through a merger, and now are looking for e-sourcing for benefits. In another case, we have a specialty healthcare company that has deployed all across the upstream side, from sourcing to contracts to supplier information management and supplier performance and spend analytics, and then look to use that to actually expand into a diversity initiative that they have from a government standpoint. And then finally, we had a grocery retailer that really looked to consolidate their entire SIM process for collecting supplier information and use this as a way to enterprise-wide be consistent for collecting and monitoring and reporting on supplier information across all their different business units through a variety of analytics, sourcing, and SIM technology. So understanding that, we know that we have different things we have to look at, different perspectives, different companies starting from a different point of view. And that in these various slides that we'll share with you after the webinar is that we know that there are different metrics that matter for strategic sourcing, for contract management, for P2P, and for supplier management. So keeping in mind those big things, the big way to kind of resolve that and understand it is that from our perspective, if you're looking for a holistic point of view, look at the wider e-purchasing strategy, learn how to complement and meet stakeholder needs, understand the right metrics that you're looking to track, and then really, again, establish a holistic procurement mindset because of the bigger picture that you're looking to expand out over the next 3 to 5 years. So with that, again, we're a little bit over, but we may have a chance to answer 1 or 2 questions, if you will. One question that has often comes up, and I'd like to direct this to Duncan real quick, is the idea around this increased view of suite technologies that have come up. I think the question is really geared towards, how are you looking at that, and how do you manage the suite question within the wider framework of looking at this holistic case that we've talked about today in the webinar?
Yeah, I think you're right, Constantine. That's a very important question. And so I certainly recommend people set out with a roadmap towards a complete solution. I think it's a big mistake to say, well, we just need a contract management solution, put that in, and then realize that you need to expand it, or just putting in spend analysis without thinking about where you go after that. So yeah, certainly pick a suite, and we're seeing people who focus only on upstream, some who focus only on downstream, and then partnerships and mergers between the two. So a suite is better, but the suites, may not have all the functionality you need, and there's some very good specialist vendors out there. So combine your suite with a complementary vendor that maybe does something that they don't do. Don't go for a complete suite just because it is complete if it lacks key functionality, or it's got an unusable user interface, or it won't sell you a proper flexible SaaS commercial deal. You have to compromise a little bit, and then like I say, fill in the gaps with some of these very good specialist products.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Duncan, for that perspective. Again, coming from the Forrester point of view, we really appreciate that and the time and effort you spent on the call today. Pierre, again, I appreciate you joining me here as a colleague, and unfortunately, we're going to have to cut this short on questions. There are a few others that are here, so that we'll like to answer those after the webinar. But again, we are going to be providing these slides as a question was asked after the webinar. And again, we really appreciate your time and staying on. Again, sometimes these things go over, and thank you again for joining us. This will then conclude the webinar, and we'll look forward to having you join us on another time.
Goodbye, everyone.